Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business of Cyber Episode 7. This is our introduction to IEC 62443. Welcome. Over 600 guests have signed up to learn more about how do they get started with IEC 62443. What are some of the misconceptions about the overall family of standards? And our focus today is to help asset owners that might be thinking about moving towards 62443. Maybe they haven't implemented it before. Maybe they don't have a very good idea of what it takes to get started. We're going to talk about some of those misconceptions. And to do so, I've got a good friend and industry colleague joining, Andre Ristaino. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, we met this year back in Q2. I actually visited the ISA headquarters in North Carolina. Really appreciate the hospitality and really learning about this series of standards is so widely adopted, Andre. I'm excited to talk to you about it today. There's over 600 people that have signed up on LinkedIn Live to listen in. Not sure how many are listening, but for those of you who can't make it through the entire duration, just understand that it'll be available on our LinkedIn for an extended period of time. And really excited to have you join today.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, take off the headphones. So I'd like to get started just by talking about who's the focus for today? Who's the persona that we're really aiming at? One of the challenges in critical infrastructure cybersecurity in general is that there's such a wide array of personnel. You've got operations people, you've got automation people, you've got cybersecurity experts. A lot of these different folks have to work together really effectively. And to really dive into our particular topic for today, I think it was important to understand what is the business of cyber. Viviana, could we throw up all the way back to the very beginning of our presentation there? The business of cyber really was created as a methodology that I saw a gap in the industry. All the different discussions for the critical infrastructure sectors all segment into the top threats, the top vulnerabilities, asset inventory, really the real technical side of the house. And with what I saw happening with global budgets being flattened out across a lot of asset owners, as I started to look at the various challenges that security and risk management leaders are facing, a lot of it comes down to resource allocation. And so we hit the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. And really, this business of cyber is a methodology that is going to continually compare resource allocation and the cost of assessing, analyzing all the different results, and map that specifically to an operation or a financial outcome for asset owners. This is something that has not been talked about really widely. Next slide. We've talked about a lot of different things over the course of the past 6 episodes. What's the difference in audits versus assessment? How do you get boards of directors on board? How do you really manage limited resources? And so I'm super excited to take this intro into 62443 through that lens. And so the real persona that we're talking to today is somebody who's thinking about 62443. They maybe heard about the series of standards. And maybe there's some sort of directive at the corporate level to get it on board. And to join me, Andre, the program manager for ISA, is going to join us. So, Andre, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, your history, and what you hope to get out of today.
Yeah, so I'm currently Managing Director of Consortia and Conformance Programs at the International Society of Automation. For those of you who may not know, International Society of Automation is a professional engineering society with about 15,000 members. Our mission is to advance the discipline of automation engineering. And so we do training. We have lots of training programs for automation engineers. Last year, we trained over 3,000 automation engineers. We have sections all around the globe in 109 countries or more. We do conferences, publications. We do standards. We're an ANSI accredited standards development organization. We've published over 150 standards, including the ISA IEC 62443 series of standards, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. So, earlier in my career, I was a software engineer. I worked at Deloitte & Touche for 10 years in their advanced manufacturing consulting group. Later on, I started up a couple of companies in similar disciplines, including one that focused on FDA regulated facilities. So a lot of different things I've done over the years, but right now here at ISA, I'm having a lot of fun driving out some important national and global initiatives around cybersecurity.
Well, we appreciate what you do for the industry. I want to dive right into a very particular question, and that is, tell us about 62443. Remember, the audience right now, we're focused on folks that may not have heard about 62443, but they're interested. So
Yeah.
Consensus-based cybersecurity standard with this shared responsibility methodology. Let's dive in there as a foundation, Andre. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So after the 9/11 event here in the United States, the automation engineers who are part of our standards organization here at ISA recognize that bad guys could do a lot of inflict a lot of damage to health, safety, and environment by disrupting operations at industrial facilities. So they thought it made sense to stand up a standards committee to develop cybersecurity standards for automation and control systems. So that was stood up in 2002, known as the ISA 99 committee, that it still exists today. We typically will develop standards, advance the American standards, and submit them to the IEC for internationalization. And so today, that relationship has evolved into more of a collaborative relationship. And all the standards technical work is done here at ISA, they're submitted as the specifications are submitted simultaneously, just about to ANSI and to the IEC for formal approval as international standards. So there's portion of the standards. One of the standards, the 2-4 services provider standard, was developed at IEC, and ISA adopted that back from the IEC. So it's part of the overall standards. So the standards have international or industrial on the front of them. In 2021, there was an evaluation of the standards, and the IEC in particular designated them as a technology horizontal standard, which means that if you look at standards that apply to industry sectors like railways, ports, electric sector, et cetera, as they're developing their industry specific standards, when they get to the topic area of cybersecurity, they're directed to look at the 62443 standards and establish them as their foundation, rather than trying to duplicate all the work that's occurred over the last 20 years. And
Yep.
so based on that, today we're seeing, the future is developing security profiles on a sector by sector basis with these standards. So for instance, today there's a new working group in ISA 99 called Working Group 14. They're doing a security profile or profiles for the electric sector, starting with substations. So when that's completed, they'll do distribution security profile, one for power generation, and also look at distributed energy resources like solar and wind.
Got it. Well, I think it's important, for years, people talked about an OT and IT divide. Whether you think it's converging, whether you think it's diverging, is really irrelevant. What has kind of dovetailed into your story here with the 62443 standard is critical infrastructure, and particularly the OT asset side of the house, has become a bigger vulnerability. There are more threats that are emanating. And so this standard has really grown, let's say over the course of the past 5 years, to, from my vantage point, is the most widely adopted standard for OT professionals out in the industry. Now, some people may disagree. I'm in the business of assessments. I'm in the business of improvement. So I'm constantly seeing asset owners and consultants that support them take a look at known frameworks that they're trying to match their cybersecurity to, known controls, known standards, and 62443. Given that it came from ISA and IEC in this great collaboration, relatively low amounts of capital towards the development of this standard comparatively to other organizations. How is it, and what is your belief system on why it's so widely adopted? I have some personal views, but I wanted to ask you first, Andre, how come this is adopted so quickly as the go-to series of standards for automation and security professionals in the critical infrastructure space?
Well, I'm glad that you're taking the position that they're being adopted quickly. There are a lot of folks who say it's moving along too slow, but it's when an individual or professional takes the time to look at the standards, they quickly realize that they're very complete. And so
the standards themselves, you're saying the standards are complete, right?
Standards are complete. And when I say complete, that means they were intentionally designed to address all the stakeholder roles in the automation lifecycle. So there's a set of standards for the product suppliers or the manufacturers who are developing automation and control systems to run production facilities. And so there's that stakeholder group. There's the service providers that are folks that are both maintenance service providers and integrators. There's a standard for them to develop and integrate and maintain systems securely and deploy them securely. And then there's 3 or 4 standards that are specific to asset owner operators who address how to establish a security program for operational technology or your automation and control systems at your production sites. Now, having said that, you have this vision of a factory and production, but if you remove industrial from industrial automation and control systems, you're talking automation and control systems. And like I mentioned before, 62443 has been established as a technical horizontal. So as the different sectors look at them, they go, okay, these are pretty complete. I don't have to redo this. And then they adopt it and establish them as a foundation. They may add some deltas to the top of it, but it's been it's getting good uptake in oil and gas. I talk to a lot of governments through our ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance. I've had many late night phone calls in the Asia Pacific region. The government of Taiwan has adopted the standards. So this is a question I get when I'm talking to legislators and regulators. They ask, if we put this in public policy language, does it create winners and losers? No.
I couldn't agree more. It's not a compliance zero-sum game. And I'm an advocate for compliance, okay? Because if you are trying to become compliant, then you're looking at different controls, you're looking at mitigating controls. So that's a different conversation, but I couldn't agree more. No doubt that from a global perspective, it is challenging to find in the era of GDPR, in the era of NIST having 882, 853, 171, NIST CSF, right? In the era of NIS and CAF, in the era of even in Australia and various parts of EMEA, we see homegrown standards by region. There's no shortage of available frameworks and standards that are out there. My perspective on 62443 is that it is widely adopted because the authors, the actual intended audience, covers a landscape that is very congruent with the way critical infrastructure operates. Vivian, let's go to the next slide and talk about this security lifecycle. So for the audience out there, 62443 covers a couple different types of audiences. Okay, we'll dive into the various chapters at a high level. But Andre, my perspective is you've got product suppliers that are building products in a secure development lifecycle. You've got asset owners that are constantly doing risk assessments. You've got consultant organizations and cybersecurity providers that want to implement their own products and their services to make asset owners more healthy and secure. Not only was the kind of the technical steering committees and the authorship of 62443 a good cross section of these players, but the actual chapters, if we can call them that, within the 62443 series of standards, they apply to different types of security life cycles. That's why I believe you see 62443 being adopted, but you also see demand for it globally, right? Help us understand, A, do you agree? And then B, can you talk a little bit about what I think is the first differentiator for 62443, and that is it applies to different life cycles for different players in the industry.
Yeah, so it's roles based, and I just defined the three roles: the suppliers, integrators, and service providers, and the asset owner operators. And so it speaks to each of those groups, and it supports the concept of a shared responsibility, meaning that the product suppliers' responsibilities to develop products that are secure and have instructions that come with them that describe how to use them properly, and the integrators, don't degrade the products as they're installed, and the asset owner operators during maintenance and operations don't shoot themselves in the foot and do things that ruin the security of them. But the big appeal, if you take the two big categories, stakeholder categories, the big appeal, if I'm a product supplier, most of the product suppliers are global. And so they want to secure their products to a standard that's recognized in all the global regulatory and governmental jurisdictions. And so if they have their product, say, certified, we run a certification program, ISA Secure. So if they're certified to 62443, that certification to that standard is recognized both in the EU and the USA and Taiwan and Japan. And so the supplier is not having to conform to multiple regulatory requirements that are overlapping, duplicative, and sometimes contradictory. On the other side, if you look at the asset owners, if you're an oil company or you're an electric company now, today in the electric sector, there's wind farms and solar farms that are being deployed all over the world by the same company. So when you're developing your corporate quality and cybersecurity standards, you can use 62443, and universally they're readily understood no matter where you are geographically. You're not trying to conform to some, all the disparate, potentially disparate regulatory language.
Well, and I also think one of the values of the standards is that, and we'll cover this soon, but when you do a framework or a controls-based assessment, a gap assessment, essentially, you don't have to pull in the whole team. You don't have to pull in folks from automation. You don't have to pull in network segmentation. You can run it as a security team. You don't have to pull in ops. It's better if you do so. And I think especially 3-2, it invites and in some ways demands collaboration across the aisle. And if we just consider the aisle, you've got operations, you've got risk people, you've got security people. These folks got to work in tandem. And the 62443 drives that level of alignment. So I couldn't agree more with you. Viviana, let's go next slide and talk about some of the misconceptions. I'll start. The first misconception that I hear is people want to get started with 62443 and they make some assumptions that if they've done a framework-based assessment or a gap assessment where they're essentially evaluating controls against a known framework, even if they're auditing to those controls and understanding if they're really implemented effectively. I think a common misconception is that rolling out 62443 is going to be as simple or as straightforward. What do you say, Andre?
Well, there's multiple dimensions to securing your enterprise, right? And so, the standards are useful as a common language when you're working with your IT departments. That's a lot of work to make that relationship work properly and have a good understanding. But one of the common misconceptions is that they're for industrial applications only. And the fact that they were designated as a technical horizontal helped sell that. I think, the title of the standards, Industrial Automation and Control Systems, we should drop the word industrial, and automation and control systems is applicable. We've certified products. We're doing a lot of certification in the building controls industry. We have Johnson Controls, Honeywell, others, major supplier, known brand for elevators. And so it's being used in a lot of different use cases now, and without too much effort. The other misconception is they're big and cumbersome. That's kind of a yes, can't disagree with that. But that was one of the mission, that's part of the mission of the ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance, is to develop work products, tons of stuff for free, overviews and summaries and descriptions on how to use the standards if you're a product developer or if you're an asset owner. There's another misconception. Some surveys have been done looking at adoption rates, and if you look at asset owners and ask how much are you adopting 62443, asking a question similar to the IT organization, are you using ISO 27001? Are your auditors auditing your IT? And usually they say, yeah, we're adopting ISO 27001. But typically particularly in the industrial arena and with a lot of companies that we see, they're developing their cybersecurity policies and procedures, and they don't use the approach of saying we're just going to wholesale adopt 62443 and we can go down the tick box and make sure that we're meeting all these requirements. They're using 62443 to inform and influence and build their policy. And so 62443 has been included either by reference or just cut and paste into many organizations' policies and procedures, and providing a lot of value for them. So the misconception that it's not being adopted quickly is a misconception.
Well, I think you got a point there. I think there's a positive correlation with what kind of resource allocation a given asset owner or organization applies to the effort and how quickly they're going to be able to adopt. If you don't prioritize the training of your people, if you don't prioritize maybe bringing in some expertise in the form of a consultant, and you don't allocate the roadmap time, then your path for adoption is going to be a lot slower than an organization that pulls everybody together, really drives alignment. And I think that's common across risk, cyber, security, safety in this industry in general. You mentioned the time to kind of deploy this standard and really this entire methodology and how it influences maybe some gap assessments or some sort of policy development or some sort of control closures down the line. I think a common misconception is I'm going to go do a controls-based framework assessment over here. I'm going to do a gap assessment. I may even audit to that. But then my 62443 effort is totally siloed and separate, maybe even different people. That's a huge misconception. My personal belief is you really can't move forward effectively with a detailed risk assessment as per 62443 3-2. We'll cover a little bit in a second, unless you have an understanding of the controls that are in place in your environments, unless you have an understanding of who's managing those controls, and unless you have some element of a risk assessment, regardless of how complex your matrix is. If you're not incorporating risk, whether it be from, you could do ISO 31000, you could do NIST 839. There's a lot of different methodologies that you can use. But what I find a common misconception is if you can start with 62443 without having a lot of those. And I think that's a misconception. You got to have a controls-based framework done. You have to understand where your controls are. You have to have a general understanding of who's managing those controls, because what just 3-2 will tell you is that you've got to start implementing threats, the likelihood of some sort of event or an occurrence. And it's all about the mitigation of your controls and how do you think about it. So when the big thing that I would ask people to walk away with right now is, yes, it's going to take you some time to implement 62443, but the things that are going to accelerate that timeline for adoption are actually rooted in some of the more rudimentary cybersecurity activities that you can do that we see a lot of people doing, whether that's regional frameworks, whether that's customer-driven frameworks, or whether that's some sort of government framework. Appreciate the perspective. Let's dive into the standards. Next slide. So what we've got here is we've got basically 4 categories, folks. You've got general, you've got policies and procedures, you have system, and then you have product life cycles, right? Walk us through maybe 60 seconds a piece, and then let's dive into some of these, because the first misconception is that 62443 is one document, right? It's not. It's a series of chapters or standards. Can you walk us through that, Andre?
Sure. So, the point of the standards is that they provide a structured engineering approach to securing operational technology. And so the standards, they will address people, policies, hardware, and software. And so that is one of the misconceptions when you talk about the standards. Some folks say, yeah, that it's talking about the technology and what the security capabilities are, et cetera, and it doesn't address the people and the process and skill sets in any of your programs. But so that's a fallacy. So here in this general section, this standards have terminology, concepts, and models, glossary of terms, and we're working on security metrics, and then developing a library of security lifecycle and use cases. So, if you want to have a conversation to solve an issue, everybody has to have a common understanding, whether it's real estate law or marriage counseling. If you don't have a vocabulary about relationships, how can you have the discussion on it? So
Totally agree. Totally agree.
That's what this does. It establishes, the models, like the zones and conduit model, terms, abbreviation, et cetera. So if you look at the next level down, so this is called policies and procedures. Broadly speaking, this category of standards addresses the asset owner operator. So there's a standard, the 2-1, that was just recently updated, and that describes how to establish a security program. And so we're actually doing a white paper on that that'll be released soon, because we get questions a lot about, well, we already have our security program established using ISO 27000. Well, that's great, because the two work together just fine. And if you don't have one, you can use 2-1. If you already have one under ISO 27000, when you get to the topic area of securing your production automation or any of your operational technology, it doesn't necessarily have to be production. It could be your building controls, other things. The 62443 works for you. So there's a 2-2 standard under development for security program ratings. 2-3 is a technical report on doing patch management. And the section 2-4 I mentioned before, this is how to work with your service providers. So many facilities will use maintenance service providers to maintain their facilities and also to maintain their controls and their production equipment. So it describes how to work with them and what the requirements are, to ensure security. So the other category that it addresses in 2-4 is this integrators. And so the integrator could be a third-party integrator, or it could be your own staff, or a combination. So the standards define these roles, doesn't say who they are, and that's by design. So the role of an integrator could be your own people or a third party, but it establishes the requirements for that role. And then the newest technical report is implementation guidance for asset owners. So let's look at the next level down. So this category of standards is specific to systems. And so there's terminology, concepts, and models for systems. There's the 3-2 is the risk assessment part, and the 3-3 is system security metrics. So 3-3 is kind of it's the list of technical requirements for your systems. And by the way, one of the beauties of the standards is that they're developed based on risk and the capabilities of your adversary. So built into the standards are four levels of four target security levels. Level one being protecting against accidental things, shooting yourself in the foot, if you will, incidental, but it's not protecting against intentional attacks. Levels 2, 3, and 4 protect against intentional attacks. Level 4 is like protecting against nation states. So it's nice that these things have been defined in the standards, so you can use it both as an asset owner when you're trying to determine what level you need to secure your systems at, or if you're a product developer and you want to determine based on use case what level you need your security capabilities to achieve. So go to the next one down.
I just wanted to make a real quick update. I put it in the chat. 3-2, that's a typo. It's not mastery glossary of terms. It's actually secure risk assessment for secure design. And we're going to dive into 3-2 in a little while. I just wanted to note that for the audience.
Yeah, I caught that typo. So
it was in there just to see who's paying attention.
Yeah, to see if I'm awake too, right?
No, it's good.
Yeah, it's my public humiliation test, right? I passed though. So the blue level addresses two things. The 62443 4-1 establishes 8 practice areas for automation and control systems product development. So it's a product development lifecycle standard, and so it describes, what the activities should be. So, for instance, secure by design, when you're designing new products or upgrading an existing product, addresses, safe coding and development practices. It addresses testing and verification, addresses response to security incidents, which includes playbooks and how you communicate with customers, ensuring that you know where your products are, so you can do a where used and do proper notification. And the playbook would include things that are driven by the shared responsibilities. So if an asset owner says, "Hey, one of your products looks like it has a security problem," you work collaboratively with the asset owner and the integrator and determine whether you really do have a vulnerability in your product, or maybe it was the asset owner or the integrator who, during configuration or an upgrade, forgot to reset the thing back to back mode or something like that. So, that's where the shared responsibility is important. The sixth, and by the way, the 4-1 standard applies both to components and system levels. So the 62443 4-2 is similar to the 3-3 standard, but it's technical security requirements for components. So that has 120 requirements in there, and it addresses 4 categories of components: software applications, network devices, host systems like Linux and Windows workstations, and embedded devices. And one of the things about the standards is that they are standards. They tend to lag the state of the art, and so today we have these things called IIoT devices or IoT devices, and the standards don't specifically address that just yet. There's a working group 9 working on that. The Security Compliance Institute, we did a study, to address the use of 62443 for securing IIoT devices, and we determined that the 4-2 standards are applicable with 4 exceptions out of the 120 requirements and 17 extensions to address IIoT device characteristics, such as connecting directly to cloud providers or untrusted networks, and combination of being a network device and an embedded device, etc. And so that work is being fed back to the committee, and that standard, when it's opened up again, is create this other category to almost be like a fifth category.
Understood. Andre, we had a question come in via live, and that is, what's the most cost-effective way to obtain all these standards and substandards? I don't know if that means how do you actually access the standards? Maybe you could cover that answer, and then I'm going to cover in our next slide how you think about actually implementing them. Could you answer that real quick on how folks can access these?
Yeah, so if the cheapest way to look at the standards is become an ISA member, just an individual member for $140 a year, you have as a member benefit, you can open up and review any of the ISA standards, not just 62443. So you can look at them, review them, and read them. If you want to buy them, we have a relationship with IHS Market. They were acquired by Standards & Poor's. They have a new name now, but they sell them. You can buy them over the web. If you want to buy a global or corporate license, they'll do special licensing, so you have a company-wide license, so you don't have your employees buying them one-off. The ANSI, by the way, when you look at the standards, you see IEC 62443 as a standard. You can also see ANSI ISA 62443. They're the exact same standard. The technical content is exactly the same. The standards are, so they're the same. You can buy them off the website at ISA, but if you just want to look at them, just become a member. It's like dirt cheap, $140 a year.
Understood. Yeah. I mean, look, it's ICE is a nonprofit organization, and that's one of the key takeaways that I think all asset owners, consultants, and product folks have to kind of ask themselves is, here's an organization that is really fueled by its members, right? It's fueled by the technical steering committees and the different participants. And, I encourage everybody to become a part of that. Viviana, let's take a note to get those details from Andre so that we can send it back to the group. If you go to the next slide, let's come back to this one. This is a deep dive into 3-2. Let's go right into the next slide, which is resource allocation. With the business of cyber, we're always thinking about a limited amount of people, limited amount of budget, limited amount of time. When you think about the different, let's say, chapters or subsections of 62443, your general and your people or your policies and procedures are generally going to take fewer resources to get off the ground. Now, at the end of this presentation, we'll showcase that there's some training for some certificates that you can get from Andre's team. But generally speaking, the amount of resources that you have to apply in sections 1 and 2 are really about establishing your overall IACS program. Now, remember, the reason that this standard takes more time, people, and money to get implemented effectively is because it reaches wider than your standard corporate-oriented governance or controls-based assessment, right? Remember that IACS is the Industrial Automation and Control Systems. And what 62443 does different than any of them is it not only approaches a wider audience, but it approaches the security in life cycles. And so go back a slide and let's look at 3-2. Now, we've already talked about 3-2 is, in my opinion, the most widely used component of 62443 outside of product developed folks like your OEMs. This is a security risk assessment that's really an entire workflow. So what you have on the screen, and we're not going to cover every detail, but what I can share is that in the coming weeks, we're going to do a super deep dive, get really technical with 3-2. We're also going to do the same with 4-1. But keeping it high level right now, I think it's important to understand what is different about 3-2 than a standard controls-based framework. So the first is that this is a true risk assessment. You have a risk methodology. You're incorporating systems under consideration, which is essentially a group of systems that accomplish some sort of automation task, right? If we were going to use a car analogy, the systems under consideration may be our engine and our drivetrain. There's tons of different components that make up that system that achieves something. On a car, you have your wheels, your tires, and your brakes. They make you go fast, they make you stop. When you think about your industrial environment or your asset owner environment, there are going to be different systems, maybe multiple systems within your own facility. And then there's different facilities across the globe with different kind of hardware, different kind of outputs, different kind of business context. That's the first differentiator with 62443, is that impresses upon you and demands that you establish your systems under consideration. The next thing that you're going to do, and it's clearly written in the standard, is that you're either going to perform a basic risk assessment or you're going to pull data from a previous risk assessment. This could be business impact analysis. It could be heat map based likelihood, threat, severity, consequences, understanding what your risk tolerances are. It could also be a framework based assessment, because what you do with that data is that you apply it within that system under what they call zones and conduits, which is just breaking up in those systems into zones that fall into the same risk category. And you're basically asking a question: does the risk that my corporate, my operational, or my business unit, does it exceed the tolerable risk that we've established? So right then and there, we have a real demarcation point. It's not as easy to just say, you know what, I'm going to implement 62443 next Saturday, and I'm going to start with 3-2, and I'm going to get my entire system design locked down. There's a lot of data you're going to need from a host of different people: operations, network people, your automation people. You may even need finance and legal to be able to help you understand what sort of risks they're willing to take on. You're going to need some sort of cybersecurity folks that are be able to talk about the real threats. You may need to pull in your vendors. You may need to pull in your hardware and your software vendors, because they may be actually managing some of the vulnerabilities and they haven't transferred that to the asset owner. It doesn't mean that it's undoable. It means that the first series of milestones to get started with a 3-2 incorporate a ton of data from a host of different organizations and people. And that's unlike jumping off with an ICSF or an ISO 27000. They're controls based. You're asking yourself, do I have these controls? Do I not? Comments or questions on anything that I've shared, Andre?
No, I think this is good, especially your emphasis on establishing scope and the system under consideration. This is one thing that we often have difficulty in describing when we're talking about assessing and certifying automation at sites. Some folks think that when you say that, you're looking at the site writ large, but many of these sites, like if you looked at a Baytown refinery at ExxonMobil, they have hundreds and hundreds of systems, and they may have many companies, operating companies, one doing chemicals, one doing gasoline, one doing something else. And so that's an important dimension of your assessment, is putting some bounds on it, so you know exactly what you're looking at.
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, your systems under consideration should be directly correlated with some of the business impact if those systems were compromised, right? So that dovetails right back to what we've been talking about with this business of cyber. It is understanding the business context of your organization, understanding what bad looks like and what good looks like, whether it's safety, whether it's non-productive time, whether it's some sort of expanded maintenance cycle that you haven't been thinking about. There are a series of threats. There are a series of likelihood that those threats are going to be able to affect your components, your systems, your zones, which will create a negative outcome. That negative business outcome is what 62443 is trying to wrap its arms around. And in order to do that effectively, once you take all that data around your zones and conduits, your target security levels, what you really do in the 3-2 workflow is you introduce a threat. You establish a likelihood and the severity or the consequence of that threat affecting that component, that system, or that zone. And what you have to ask yourself is, do I have a control? Do I have a compensating control? Do I have any sort of measures that I can add to this equation to reduce the likelihood? Because the overall severity is not going to change, right? We change that likelihood, you're actually reducing the risk for the organization. And that process is iterative. It's continual. It's constant. So, there's two different walks of life as it relates to overall cyber improvement in critical infrastructure. You've got controls-based frameworks where you're evaluating yourself against a known number of standards. You select those controls. You know that you've got to implement that. You go and implement them during a budget cycle with your project roadmap. And next year, You have fewer controls that you have to focus on, or you can move to new controls. That is a process of improvement that is evaluating yourself and your program against a known framing. When you jump into the 62443 world, why it is so expansive and why we have adoption at some of the more mature asset owners with a lot more resources is because they have been doing the latter, the controls-based system, for a long time. They understand the controls that are in place, and now they're taking it to the next level, and they're asking themselves one very basic question. If you remember anything from this podcast, my perspective is 62443, specifically on the asset owner side with 3-2, is about constantly asking yourself, with tons of data points, what are the other controls that I can put in place to decrease the likelihood of these threats that are not going anywhere? That takes a lot of expertise. And I want to dive into really some of the challenges and common mistakes that people may have. We've talked about it, Andre: lack of training, lack of expertise, no clear understanding of their business assets. Can you dive into some of those other challenges that you've seen with 62443?
I think probably the biggest challenge is resources. Folks who understand operational technology well enough, A, and then B, understand information technology as well, so they can secure these systems. Generally speaking, the cybersecurity discipline, particularly for OT, is a relatively young discipline. One of our major mantras here at ISA is we're trying to elevate OT cybersecurity from an art to a science to an engineering discipline. If you look at safety, 50 years ago, when the discussions were first being had about safety, these safety incidents, people getting injured or killed, look like random accidents, quote unquote.
Right.
Well, once you boil it down and really studied it, you realize they weren't accidents. Most of them were preventable, some phase, either in design or operation or whatever. And they were able to mathematically model, a likelihood of safety incidences. So I'm not sure we're going to get to that level of science with cybersecurity, but that's where we want to head. And that's
for the moon. Shoot for the moon. Is that what it is? Shoot for the moon. You hit a star. I think if we can match, let's go to the next slide. If we can match what we've done with safety in general, I think we're going to be ahead of it. And I think there's so many awesome asset owners that have deployed a lot of human capital towards your team with steering committees. And, we can learn a lot from them. I think that the 62443 journey for a lot of the more mature asset owners is coming to a stage where they're pushing it downstream. They're telling people at conferences, they're telling their peers, they're moving from one business to the next. And I think that's why we see the adoption, and we want to see 62443 adopted, because I have not found a more encompassing risk methodology that addresses the unique considerations of critical infrastructure as well. So I'd like to pass it back. And what are the top 5 things that you would ask asset owners to think about when they start trying to plan their journey out with 62443, Andre?
Yeah, I get asked this question. What are everybody wants the easy button. What are the top 5 things I need to do? And I look at the standards with 120 requirements, and there isn't an easy button. But the first step is to, if you don't have somebody internal that's got some training, the standards form your foundation for understanding and positioning on addressing the problem. So send your folks to training. ISA's got great training on the standards. They provide the structure and context for addressing the problem. There's plenty of other places for great training as well, like SANS and some others. But you want the standards. ISA has a series of training that's wonderful. And if you don't have somebody inside to manage your projects or program or processes, whatever you have, then you really need to bring in some folks from outside who've done assessments and set up programs repeatedly. They may look like they're expensive, but they'll provide you a shortcut, and they can come back and give you some reviews periodically. But you really need folks that understand this, just like with safety experts or an OSHA consultant, in the safety world. And so don't be afraid to do that. But you have to know your business. And so, like INL has this thing called cyber informed engineering, and there's consequence driven cyber informed engineering, where you look at what are your crown jewels, what assets, if they were taken down, are going to really hurt your business or hurt your reputation or cause pollution in the environment, et cetera. And so once you identify those, that helps you establish your priorities for what to look at and where to invest your time and energy. For sure, have an incident response plan, and then there are a lot of companies around that you can contract with, like Dragos and others that will help you out with developing a response plan, and then they're on call as a service. And but do that, get a response plan in place. Out of our ISA GCA, we stood up this thing called ICS for ICS, Incident Command System for Industrial Control Systems. And so if you look at CISA and FEMA, they have incident response plans for like floods and fires and hurricanes. But what's missing is the context and vernacular and profiles for the folks that you would need for a cybersecurity incident. So we're standing up as for free. You can go there, you can volunteer. We've got 1,400 people participating. We're doing free training, the online free training. But at any rate, go there. It's free, and there's some great people doing great work. We're doing a lot of collaboration with other organizations, including INL and FEMA and CISA on this as well. So we're doing the private side of the public-private partnership. I would encourage you to go there, get an incident response playbook set up.
Sure.
And, then, in your procurement, insist on companies providing products that meet 62443 security capabilities at level 2 or higher. And I run a program that does that ISA secure, but there's other places where you can also have, seek products that have other evaluations to the standards.
Makes perfect sense.
Yep, those are the 5 things that I would consider, and yeah.
No, I appreciate that. A couple comments on all these. Going back from bottom to up, I think having competent. I would connect number 2 and number 5, right? In IECS and in critical infrastructure in general, there's just a real there's a brain drain right now on OT cybersecurity specialists. And when you get the pressure from the board of directors, the pressure from non-technical C-suite that are saying, hey, OT is really important to us now. What we see a lot is IT people, IT systems engineers, IT leadership that has established themselves with a procurement lifecycle strategy. They've established themselves with some sort of incident response planning. These folks are starting to have the responsibility of critical systems, right? Beyond the IT corporate network. So I would actually connect 2 and 5, right? When you buy secure systems from really great vendors, I've always encouraged people as part of the business of cyber methodology is to get those vendors where you're going to have a lot of your expertise in critical infrastructure. Get them to train your folks too. Even if it's not a SKU or a line item, get your vendors to help you. I also think if you're going to, I couldn't agree more, having an incident response plan has got to be a major function for asset owners in general. It's probably the number one thing you can do. But here's the first thing that an incident response exercise or a plan is going to ask you. Hey, what are your top critical assets? What controls do you have in place? Because we got to understand what we're going to test against, right? So I would actually add to the list, as you look to your 62443 journey, you've got to get assessments done to a known framework, to a known standard, whether that's regional, whether that's homegrown. You've got to evaluate your facilities, your people, your processes, and your technology against a known standard or framework. What that's going to do is it's going to unlock the gaps. It's going to unlock the controls, visualization, and you got to have a system of record to manage it. If you're going to go on a 62443 journey, folks, you better buckle up for the long haul, because no one wants to implement this level of resources to try to get a report at the end of it, which in reality is just going to be recognition of our current threats, acceptance of those, and then we move on. It's got to be a continual process. So I would say invest in the long term in a true improvement strategy. The idea of training for your team, you talked a lot about a common syntax, which we talked about was chapter 1. Couldn't agree more. Where I think critical infrastructure SRM leaders are challenged the most is they got mining facilities in Western Australia. They've got another facility up in Germany, and then they have something in South America. Totally different languages, totally different vendor composition, different types of business outputs for the various facilities, yet one group or one person is responsible for the security of all of them. So when we think about your top 5, Andre, about expert opinions, training for your team, and identifying critical business assets, I think syntax is more important than anything. You've got to be able to say, these are the controls that we know we have in place globally, and there's about 70% overlap in a lot of the known frameworks out there. So getting a really good assessment done on your controls, having that in the system of record, and then working every day tirelessly to the left and right of your organization. If you're in security, got to work with ops. If you're in ops, you got to start working with legal. If you're in legal, you have to understand the cyber players. If you're going to be successful with a 62443 journey, you're going to need that common syntax. You're going to need to understand your business assets. You're going to need to understand the controls, who manages those controls. There's got to be a history there. And finally, you got to be able to work as a team. I think we'd agree that those are the core tenets for acceleration of your overall journey. Let's finish it up with a really simple question. Maybe we can break the slides. What is this is a training opportunities. Obviously, you got certificates for 5 different levels. We will share this information with the audience. But I'd like to pass it back to you to finish out, Andre. What's the future of 62443, and how can folks listening in be a part of that or support that?
Yeah, so there are a number of organizations that I oversee, and there's a place for somebody in every one of them, whether it's the ISA GCA, which provides advocacy for the standards and marketplace enablement, or ISA Secure program, where we're establishing assessment programs for products and certification for products, and other opportunities for collaboration. We're collaborating with INL on their cyber informed engineering, looking at how that fits in with the standards. We have an agreement with NEMA. We're working with the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, the North American Transmission Forum, building cybersecurity, which is a building automation. So there's plenty of places to play, if you will, and get some help. From our end, our next big step is, we're doing training, we're doing the standards at ISA, we're collaborating with a lot of organizations, we're doing assessment and certification programs to the standards. We've done a lot in the product side. Our next journey is doing an assessment program for the asset owner series of standards, and I think you had a slide up there about that. But I would encourage folks if you're an asset owner, or if you're a consultancy who provides services to asset owners in the space of doing assessments, we're putting together a program that we think will look a lot like what happened in the accounting industry. The Financial Accounting Standards Boards establishes GAAP standards for how you do bookkeeping, auditing, and that sort of thing. And so this program will use the 62443 standards, the asset owner series of standards, and establish a core program for assessing your automation and control systems at your operational sites. And by the end of next year, we'll have a specification and a program, including training and credentialing, that addresses assessing the asset owner site deployed systems. And that'll be useful for making derivatives for multiple industries as security profiles are developed, particularly from the 62443 or IEC committees, if they do security profiles for rail or ports or water and wastewater, this specification can be easily adapted for that. So that contact information on that should be in this slide deck that'll get passed out at the end of
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll make sure that I think we had almost 200 people pop in and out. There were 600 that joined or registered. All 600 will have access to this information. This was a great event, Andre. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the asset owner and product and cyber community. 62443 is not going anywhere. It's encouraging. It's, my personal opinion is that adoption has far exceeded probably even the original author's expectations. And I think it calls upon all of us to continue to make the standard better. So I'm an advocate for everything that you're doing, and I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the Business of Cyber series, where we connect resource allocation to cyber improvement. And thank you, Andre, for joining. Join us in the next couple of weeks. We'll be doing a deeper dive into IEC 62443 3-2, 4-1. And based on the comments here, I think a really good add would be, what is the business side of 62443 as you think about resource allocation across your budget, your time, and your people? I'm your host, Ted, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Andre, have a wonderful week, and thank you for the commitment of time.
Thank you very much. Take care.